After Farad's death, Anna leads the Nameless One through the tenement of thugs and into the alley of lingering sighs, where she had previously found him dead. There, a face in the wall, speaking on behalf of the alley itself, confirms that he was killed by a group of phantom shades. Afterward, the Nameless One agrees to help the alley in its process of dividing itself, and in return for helping it, the alley opens up a way to the lower ward. Once the party arrives there, Mort is kidnapped by were-rats, and the Nameless One pursues and rescues him from Lothar, a master of skulls and a powerful mage. Lothar raises the skulls in his collection to obtain knowledge that would otherwise be unattainable, but he agrees to allow Mort to leave and provide information on the Nameless One's past if he retrieves a skull of value and brings it to him. After doing so, Lothar reveals that the Nameless One's mortality was granted to him by a night hag named Ravel Puzzlewell, who had been mazed by the Lady of Pain many years ago. In an attempt to find a way to the place where Ravel is caged, the Nameless One goes to the clerks' ward, where he experiences many of his own memories through sensory stones, and eventually finds Ravel's daughter, Kenzai Saris, in the brothel for slaking intellectual lusts. Her blood proves to be the key to the portal that leads to Ravel, and after collecting a few drops on a handkerchief, the Nameless One enters the portal leading to Ravel's maze. I think before we start today, I would like to make some corrections to some previous episodes. Thanks to all the people who watch and comment and make sure that we're staying on the right track, being accurate. So when that happens, I like to try to call that out. You've got a comment from Mr. Edders, who brought up as having made a documentary on Planescape.
So Mr. Edders123 says, just to clarify the design doc thing, it may not have been Chris Avallone himself who designed the entire document. The document was designed by a team, and there were certainly some younger creators than him who were involved in drafting the pitch for the game as well. And so a lot of the violence and the edginess of the initial pitch, we attributed it to him alone. It may have come from multiple people than just him.
Sure. Yeah. Good point, and thanks for bringing that up. Maybe we should have him on for our final episode or something. That'd probably be a good idea, since we're recording that in 2 days, to actually ask him.
Yeah, maybe.
Anyway, Mr. Edders, you will see this before the day of recording if you're watching the series.
If you watch day one.
If you don't get a message from me, or if you don't see it, because I will send a message, but if you don't get it and you're watching this, please know I'm trying to reach out to you about recording literally tomorrow. So if you're available Thursday,
that'd be great.
It'd be great to have you. We'd love to do that. A couple other things people brought up also, Fallout. So I think I had asked in that episode about what engine Fallout was made in. Was that also Infinity Engine? And it's not.
Right.
So wanted to clear that up. Fallout was made in a different proprietary engine. And then what was the other one?
Oh, it was the spiritual successor.
Torment,
yes. Tides of Numenera.
Tides of Numenera does not take place in the Planescape universe.
Yeah, it's a separate. It's just a spiritual successor. It's in a different world, technically.
Yeah. So thank you for all those corrections. Thank you for making sure that our information is accurate, checking us on things. We appreciate you guys. Just wanted to let you guys know we saw that and make a official correction on those points. Anytime we say something that's wrong, please tell us. We don't want to say wrong things. So
we're not trying to, people. So today we're mostly going over the lower ward and the clerks ward. And the way that they kind of go in sequence is the lower ward first. And there's some really cool stuff there, specifically like the foundry. The lower ward in general they consider it more of the productive ward. It's where the workers, it's like a blue collar place, whereas the clerks ward is like the white collar people and the wealthy people. So in the lower ward, there's not as much to talk about. So most of this episode is going to be on the clerks ward.
Yeah.
But there are a few notable things. In particular, the foundry. It's probably the big one there.
Yeah.
There's a lot to do there.
What do they call them?
The Godsmen.
The Godsmen, but their official name. It's like the believers of the source or something like that.
Oh, yes. Very nice. Yeah.
We'll talk about that. The one thing before you get to the lower ward that stuck out to me, I guess, because you go through the Tenement of Thugs, which is basically just like this, I don't know, really old mansion thing where a bunch of like thieves and, you know, bad people gangs are at. You just like fight your way through there. And then you get to this alley called the Alley of Lingering Sighs. And it's alive. Like the alley itself is like a living thing. So Anna takes you to the place where she found you dead.
Oh,
and
right.
then like
That's right.
a face in the wall sort of like pops out and like, oh, you're fetching alive. That's crazy.
Well,
kind of
because
thing.
the face like watched us
Get
die.
killed.
Yeah.
So it confirms how we died, which was this group of like shades that came and killed us off. So, you know, that piece of information is confirmed by the alley of Lingering Sighs. But it's also like, I guess you would call it as a living thing, this alley, which is a living thing. Its method of procreation, it's trying to divide, almost like a cell or something like that is the way I thought of it.
Yep.
And it's not able to do so because the Davis who serve the Lady of Pain, they continually go around and repair damage. So anytime like cracks or any type of separation begins to happen, they go and repair it.
Yeah.
And I think I wrote down some of the dialogue from the alley here. It was kind of crazy. I cannot delay division much longer. Pressure builds. Soon stones will crumble, and the floating ones will repair me to destruction. Will repair me to destruction.
Well, think about this.
Interesting.
Think about this. Think about it like how cancer works, and with specifically like what's the word?
The telomeres?
Telomeres and telomerase and that kind of stuff. That when you have functions within the cells that are geared towards repair too aggressively, that actually causes a different problem. It causes cancer.
Right.
Whereas when things are too loose and then things are able to divide too quickly or too often, then aging happens quicker and then the telomeres fray. But when the telomeres are capped and the caps are maintained really strictly and they're never allowed, then you get what is essentially known as cancer. And it's funny, this is a different, because it's still one organism, right? Because cancer would be this thing still like repeating itself over and over. But the concept here of I'm being fixed too much fixing, right? Which is a weird problem to have, right? Especially in modern society where we look around and we just see a bunch of problems and, we got to fix these problems, right? Society or government or whoever it is, somebody make a company that fixes this problem. We just see problems and we want to fix the problems.
Yeah.
But sometimes this desire to always want to fix things over and over and over and just be fixing, can lead to its own problems, right? Where it's like, wait a second, let things happen. Let things happen naturally.
Right.
So,
yeah, what's so interesting about this, I guess, little quest is because it goes on to say here, prepare me to destruction, right? Pressure is too much. Many places folded inside, not enough space. Must divide. So
it's like the division is happening internally.
Yeah.
Like a bunch of different rooms or folding things on top of each other.
I imagine this is a great form of suffering or torment.
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
That this alley is experiencing, right?
Yeah.
Now, just before you reach this point, there's a little house in the alley. You go inside and there's like a decomposing Davis in there. And you can use an ability that you learned from Stale Mary back in the Dead Nations. She was like the leader of the zombie faction.
Yeah.
And she teaches you how to speak to dead things. So basically conjure like the spirit of that dead thing to talk to you. I think it's called Stories Bones Tell, or that's what the name of the ability is called. Anyway. Yeah. You can use that on the Davis and learn how it got trapped in there and basically just like starved to death. It couldn't leave.
Right.
Because the house is enchanted or built in such a way to where anytime he tried to make a crack in the wall, it would repair itself. So it couldn't escape. It couldn't leave.
Right.
There's another Davis out in the alley just kind of going on making repairs.
So you got to kind of do that same thing.
Essentially, what the alley is asking you to do is get rid of that Davis so it can divide. And you have to choose to cause great suffering to this Davis and allow it to like starve to death in a house, in order to help this other being,
Yeah.
which is also experiencing tremendous suffering. It's like
Right.
they're both torments. And I think naturally a person, like the player playing the game, would probably feel more sympathy towards the Davis, which is a little more humanoid
Right.
than this sort of abstract
A wall.
concept of an alley being alive.
Yeah.
And I think that it can feel like, oh man, this is messed up what I have to do here. But I was thinking about that, and it seems to me, if you can get out of your, I don't know what the term for that, I'm sure there's a term for it, where it's like almost like in-group bias, but that's not the term. But you're more sympathetic towards something more similar to you
like
than not.
anthropocentric, maybe.
Sure. Yeah, it's one or the other has to suffer.
Yeah.
There is no way for both of these things to avoid that suffering. One or the other has to be sacrificed, right?
Neither.
Oh, Sophie's Choice.
Oh, say that again.
Sophie's Choice.
Sophie's Choice. Can you explain what that is?
I would be spoiling the end of a movie with Meryl Streep. It's basically where you're just choosing one impossible thing over the other.
Sure.
Yeah.
Another way to say that is neither can live while the other survives.
Yeah.
There you go.
Harry Potter.
All good points. So, who am I? Because I guess what I'm saying is I felt that way initially. I felt like, oh man, this is wrong what I'm doing. This is messed up.
Yes.
Because I wasn't thinking of the alley of lingering sighs as a thing like me.
As a person
right.
with needs. Yeah.
Like a Davis also isn't a human, but it's more human than that is.
Right.
But I think that there's maybe a fallacious sort of inbuilt way of thinking that makes you biased towards things that are more like you than not.
Yeah.
And to consider them and their suffering above that of others.
Right.
And that just kind of struck me like, who am I to say that the alley's suffering is not as pertinent or important as this Davis's, but...
Very apt. I think that's very interesting, actually. One of the cool things is this choice would have been a lot less difficult if the alleyway didn't help us. If the alleyway wasn't in some ways like giving us more information about us that we've been seeking this whole game. Otherwise, it would have been pretty easy to side with the Davis. But, the game design is such that these philosophical conundrums are often very even. Right. Mm-hmm. So they'll take one thing where it's like, obviously no one cares about an alley, but what if the alley really helped you and is a really nice guy? Okay, now make your choice. Now it's a harder choice, right?
Right.
You went with the alleyway, right?
Right.
Yeah,
well, I think you have to.
Yeah,
I don't think there's any
can't.
choice because you can't progress in the game otherwise.
Right.
So it's not really a choice in the sense that I might have implied earlier.
Oh, but still, you're right. It's not a technical choice in the game, but it is a choice in the story.
Yeah, sure. So anyway, another thing I found interesting about it is that you can tell the Davis the truth. You don't necessarily have to deceive the Davis into entering that house, knowing what's going to happen. It's one of those choices where you can tell the truth or lie.
Oh, yeah.
And the truth can be, I saw this other Davis, this dead Davis, in this house over here. It seemed as if it was trapped in there somehow and couldn't escape.
Right.
And the Davis will still go in. Or you can say, there's this Davis that I found, I don't know how it died, or something like that. So you could be deceitful in trying to trick it to go inside, or you can tell it the truth. Either way, it's going to go in there, because the only way for you to progress is for the alley to open the way to the lower ward. So you are counting on its help.
Right.
But I found it interesting that they threw that in there. You don't necessarily have to be deceitful in the way you go about tricking this Davis into a situation where it will starve and suffer terribly.
Even if you're not being deceitful, you are still, I don't know, maybe
pushing it in a direction where it's going to.
Because maybe you're not, like, to avoid being anthropocentric, you are more, like going to worry about, think of an alleyway as though it's alive. But in doing everything that we're doing, we're still being very egocentric, right? You're still being very self-centric. Like, I need to progress. So whoever dies so that I can walk forward, that's totally fine, which is a more difficult ethical conundrum, in my opinion. But
Definitely.
also one to where a video game can't exist unless it only chooses one side of that each time forever.
I guess there was a point earlier in the Dead Nations where you could, it's one of the few places where you can actually have a game over in the game.
Oh,
Because
really?
death does not lead to game over in this game.
Oh, right, yeah,
You
it
just wake up again and go
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
But when you sit on the throne at the Dead Nations
That's right,
and
yeah, I
assume
remember
the
that.
seat of the Silent King,
Yeah.
that's one of the few ways in which you can get a game over because you can't escape that seat again. I
Right.
think we brought that up in the
Yeah.
previous episode, right?
Yep.
Maybe they could have done something similar here, or unless I'm sorely mistaken, maybe there is a way in which you can just say, I'm not going to freaking trick this Davis and I'm not going to warn it or whatever. And the game would give you a game over. Like you just can't progress unless you are egocentric in the way you're talking about,
Right.
which I think would color that particular ethical conundrum in a really interesting way as well.
Yeah.
I can self-sacrifice in order to, but in doing so, cause this alley of lingering sighs to have this. I'm just
Then
thinking
both.
of this.
You're
this
right. You're right.
Compression.
Yeah.
This, even if it's not physical pain in the sense that we experience it with nerves and a brain, right? There's this sense of compression, like endless compression,
Yeah.
that would just be horrifically uncomfortable, even just from a sense of maybe claustrophobia or becoming so dense that eventually it creates a black hole and sigil and the whole place gets sucked inside.
That's right.
Or
It
something.
just keeps folding until
Right.
eventually its mass gets
Like,
too great.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
ways you could kind of continue to think about this,
Yeah.
and almost no result is going to allow you to escape the fact that somebody has to suffer an incredible amount of torment, which is
Right.
the whole premise of the game.
Yeah.
So I really liked that. I thought
Me
that
too.
was a really interesting element to this very short part of the game
Yeah.
that might seem like there's not much to talk about or maybe a bit inconsequential, but
And stones do speak.
that's
I
a good
think,
point.
in my opinion, you go around, go to a forest, you see things. There's stories to how everything got where it is. But if you've ever been to like a really old city, right, or a place with cobblestone streets and old buildings, an alleyway can. And every now and then, sometimes you'll go to a really old place and things are being encroached. Maybe there's garbage everywhere and there's like modern buildings, kind of every other building is modern and the other ones aren't. And the old church is now like a club and like everything looks different, right? But it still has that old feel to it. Like sometimes there's a sense in which the stones of the alley and of the buildings themselves are kind of like screaming and they have this story to tell that's kind of disappearing. It's going away and it's being replaced by, a smorgasbord of other things.
Yeah.
Just one thing, just a couple of extra thoughts on the Alley of Lingering Sighs. I thought it was a nice way to demonstrate the microcosm of the macrocosmic outer planes, and that it's sort of a small version of what's constantly going on in that universe, where it's, in this case, it's trying to fix it too much, which is in a sense trying to impose too much order on the alley.
And law, yeah, law. It's the law side of things.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Sure.
But then when you do that too much, then it unfolds into chaos. And then just this entire process, it got me thinking about something else that Dakon said the first time that we met him and trying to determine whether or not sigil knows itself. Is what's going on in a place like this sort of a natural process of this the entire outer planes, or is it something like deeply wrong and the alley needs to know itself? And that's a question that's a little bit too big a question for my small brain to be able to answer, but it's fascinating to contemplate.
That's super fun, though. I actually like that.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Beardmo is saying something here in the Patreon chat that I think is maybe important to add another element to this too. Inaction leads to suffering, and action leads to suffering of another kind.
Right.
I think that's also something that a lot of people struggle with, myself included, is thinking, well, if I do this or this, it's going to cause this kind of suffering. It's better that I don't do anything. I can't remember the term for this, but it's essentially what makes people freeze up in like an event where maybe there's a robbery happening and you're watching it,
The bystander effect.
And the bystander effect, that's what it's called.
Right.
Where, well, if I don't involve myself, then I'm not at fault. This plays a little bit of a role in the trolley problem as well.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah.
Where you'll feel responsible for the death of the one if you pull the lever.
Yeah.
For sure. Like, I caused that.
Yeah.
But if I don't do anything and the other 5 die,
well,
I didn't cause that. It was already happening.
Right.
Yet, your inaction, you can define that as having caused that suffering too.
Totally.
You could have done something.
And legally, you might also be liable for that one person, one person who died now.
So,
but also in economics, just in general, there's a saying that there are no solutions; there are only trade-offs.
Right.
So you're not solving problems; you're just substituting and trading one problem for another.
Yeah, I think that's what makes. I think this is especially a difficult thing for me. I have a personality that tries to be like a mediator or to try to help people understand each other. Well, hold on, let's consider the perspectives here.
Right.
I don't like to just jump all in on one side because I tend to feel as if there are problems in this perspective. We should be aware of those too.
Right.
But I think for people like me, that you're especially in danger of becoming inactive.
Right.
I feel like even just in recent times, I've been kind of struggling with such a thing that happened in my life. And I've been really thinking about that a lot. Like, okay, there's got to be times where your brain can go, no, you have to act.
You have
now.
to be active now. Yeah.
And
you got to have strong convictions.
Yeah.
And virtues and an ethical code and morals and all of that stuff, a strong foundation. You've got to be pretty sure you're right if you're going to act.
Well, not even necessarily. It's what you just said. You have to be willing to live with the fact that you're just trading off
or that
something.
Yeah.
And
true.
You're not going to make a perfect solution. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And that's a really hard thing to come to terms with.
It is, especially... I don't know, this works with like government too, or like in a democracy where you're supposed to vote for things. And then it's like, okay, you want to just solve the problems. They're telling you that they can solve all the problems. But the truth is, they're just going to do some trade-offs. And now you got new problems. And which ones are you willing to live with?
Right. And so, I don't know. I felt like as I was revisiting this scene, considering some things that had happened recently and how I was thinking about them, it really stuck out to me that this was a thing that I really need to consider more.
Yeah.
The perfect solution doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And accepting that it doesn't exist, your inaction is a problem. You need to be able to, because it's a hard line to draw. Sometimes it is better to, okay, let's step back and let's think about this a little more and let's not be hasty. Right?
Treebeard. Nice.
Let's not be hasty. Treebeard is a great example.
Yeah.
They needed to do something.
Right.
It was essential that they act, even though there were many things or many arguments that could be made for why it's not their responsibility, why it could lead to problems that they would have later.
Yep.
Maybe it's a better thing
all true
for this to go this direction if we don't do anything. But I think that point that Birmo's making is something I've been thinking about a lot, and I'm glad he brought that up.
Very good.
So if people are going to suffer, and there's going to be torment no matter what, whether you do this or nothing, you know, you're not going to escape the fact that you will be culpable for some amount of suffering in the world. That's a hard thing, I think, for people who want to be virtuous, who want to do what's right.
But inaction is not a virtue.
Yes, that's true. That's all I've got for Alley of Lingering Sighs. So we'll move on to lower wards.
Okay, good. I just have this quote, and I don't even know who said it. I don't know, but it was a brilliant quote, and I wrote the quote down, and then I put it in quotes, and then I didn't attribute it to anyone. But it says, your mortality is the key to your existence. I don't know who said it, but since we're in a world of keys and portals and mortality...
Want me to tell you?
Yes, please do.
For it.
It was Lothar, the guy who collected the skulls.
Ooh, very nice.
Lothar, right. Lothar is the skull collector who tells you about Ravel.
Yes, that's right. So,
gotcha, man.
Your mortality is the key to your existence, right? If you're immortal What's to keep you from putting something off till tomorrow? Like, why would you ever do anything now? You could always do it. The only reason to do things now and not tomorrow is because you don't have forever, man. Like, go out and do stuff, right? It'll be too late one day, and then you'll never have the chance again. But if you're immortal, it's like, well, like there is no reason to like do anything. But when you're mortal, all of a sudden it's like existence becomes this, this beautiful like a deck of cards, right? That you can like pick and choose. And anyways, I thought that line was really good, especially given that it's a key, right? Because you're in a portal, the existence is the portal, and mortality is the key to experience, basically.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. I have a quote from Alan Watts that I was going to bring up much later in regarding the sensorium.
Because I got that too, yeah.
Did you have the same Alan Watts thing?
No, well, maybe, but
the dream of life or whatever it's called? Oh, okay, different thing. Okay.
Nope.
All right.
But I've got notes on this. Basically, the same topic is going to come up again later.
Yeah, it made me think of something else that he said in regards to like death implies life.
Oh yeah,
kind of talking about opposites. The Kybalion also kind of goes into this concept quite a bit, where it's opposites are really the same thing, just experienced in different degrees.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that plays along really well into that quote. Right.
Right.
Anyway.
And coax metal too. When we get into his stuff with the machines and all that, and he talks about like rigidity is death as well. I've got some stuff there too. But.
Yeah. So maybe we should just dive into Quack's metal.
Let's do it.
I don't have much else from the lower ward. I mean, I think we should at least touch on the Great Foundry. But there's not much that I took away as far as like thematic underpinnings and the philosophical stuff we like to discuss from that. But I think there is some great stuff from Quack's metal.
So coax metal is iron given purpose, according to himself. And if you think about this, if coax metal is iron given purpose, then artificial intelligence, as we know it now, is silicon given purpose. Basically, you just take this meaningless, this matter that exists, and you apply it to something, and you give it a way to express itself. And now we have silicon given purpose. And then coax metal says that he forges the instruments by which the multiverse will be unmade. It's a huge giant. It's just hardcore. I like coax metal. Don't love his philosophy, but the character is awesome.
Yeah, as with all the.
Yeah, it's an extreme, right?
With all of the philosophies in the game, they're carried to extremes that are impossible to really sympathize with if you think about them for 5 seconds. But he serves entropy. So he serves what, as far as our current understanding of the universe's fate is essentially where its destination is going to be in
dispersal of
however many centillion years that's going to be. But, well, maybe I should explain that for people who aren't necessarily familiar with the concept. I think the best way to think about the death of the universe or entropy is you can take like really hot tea or something like that in a clear glass and you pour, say, some cold milk into it. And at the beginning of that reaction, you'll see some really interesting complex forms.
Yeah.
Cloudiness and just this billowing, interesting stuff happening.
Yeah, like nebula and like a horse head or whatever. Yeah.
Really cool shapes, complex stuff happening.
Yeah, with hard lines.
But as the heat and the cool liquids begin to mix and the tea cools down over time, eventually you'll just kind of get this singular, bland, cloudy, maybe liquid.
Yeah.
Where there are no longer any shapes at all. It's just kind of still and there's nothing really happening. That's the concept behind the entropy of the universe is the Big Bang was this enormous reaction where all this energy and matter is reacting and creating all these complex forms like galaxies and stars and planets. But as the universe spreads out and cools, eventually all of that light and matter will dissipate and energy will essentially just go into this state of entropy where it's so spread out and so cool, almost like an absolute zero, right?
Yeah.
All the matter will essentially be destroyed and it'll just be nothing, which would there be without things with which to measure between. I mean, space-time has no meaning at that point, so it would essentially equal non-existence. Right. That's the idea of entropy. So this character, Quaxmetal, is in service of that.
Yeah.
Almost like it's a god. He wants to bring about the end of the multiverse of Planescape.
You know what's also interesting? Because you just brought up something pretty fun. Quaxmetal is creating the tools by which entropy will dissolve everything, right? And AI. Do I have to finish that sentence?
So
let's just say there's a danger to AI that it could also be working towards a very similar end.
Sure. That AI is a
it is the tool. It develops the tools by which
is relevant to the concept brought up in this game.
Let's just at least say that the world as we know it will be destroyed through those types of means. And who knows beyond that?
Yeah. Anything you want to add to that conversation, or it just more in regards to Quaxmetal, Max?
Yeah, it's just this guy. He is such a doomer. He makes the 13-year-old doomers on Reddit look like a kid who just got their Xbox taken away.
Oh, those poor kids, man.
Yeah, I think the most interesting part about his philosophy is that he doesn't see how the philosophy that he spent his entire life adhering to has got him to the point that he's at right now, because he's spent his entire life in service to the Doomers, the Doom Guard, the people that are trying to spread entropy throughout the multiverse. And it has gotten himself into the point where the tower that he's in has ended up in Sigil, and that tower was used to build portals to other dimensions where that entropy could be spread. But for whatever reason, because it's ended up in Sigil, it can't do that anymore. And so Quaxmetal is just stuck there, and he's just making tools for what purpose? And so, but he's so committed to his ideology, so committed to his cause, that he'll just sit there forever making weapons. And those weapons, I don't think, are being used for anybody. It's just a closed off tower, if I'm not misunderstanding correctly.
Yeah,
so it's just
there's some way in which you open a portal to even get into there in the first place.
Yeah, you have to not want to get in there.
Yeah, that's what it was. You had to defeat that, I forget the names of the demons, Abishi or whatever they're called. There's some quest where he's standing over in that area.
Right.
And you defeat him or whatever. And then the way to get into the tower, like you're saying, is you have to not want to get there, which is, again, just another way in which this game weaves these really brilliant concepts that are just very clever. But anyway.
Just doing the exact opposite of the tropes. But yeah, it's just, again, it's like we're trying to understand for lack of a better word, psychology of the alley of lingering size. Just trying to understand the psychology of somebody like Quaxmetal, how he probably, I don't know, who the hell knows how long he's been there, yet he's so committed to the cause of entropy that at no point would take a step back and reflect on, oh my goodness, maybe I was wrong.
Right.
I'm stuck here. What am I doing here? There's no purpose to what I'm doing.
But he is iron that was given purpose. And
right. What purpose is that iron serving at the moment?
I guess if you don't think about it hard enough, which he isn't.
No, nobody does.
Right.
Then he's living a perfectly fulfilling life.
Right. I guess, if you're unconscious about it and you're not thinking too hard about it, then maybe it's just unconscious bliss.
Right.
But it's sad.
Because, again, I think this is something we brought up earlier, but I think that these people, and maybe this is a commentary, I wouldn't know, I'm not in the minds of the creators, on maybe sort of the way the average person chooses their worldview or ideology or, ethical compass or whatever you want to call it. I don't think most people think about it that much.
Right.
They just want to find some purpose in the torment that they experience. There's got to be a reason why. Yep. There's got to be a reason why I'm going through this.
Yeah, has a
this
why,
is a very convenient explanation that I was handed to by my parents, or that I stumbled across amongst my peers, or that my culture accepts already,
or that you found on YouTube
Right.
from
And
the lecture.
there we go. I don't have to investigate a reason for why I'm going through all of this torment and suffering anymore. This gives me it, and I accept that, and that makes it easier for me to cope.
Sure.
I believe that
It's called copium.
yeah, copium. It's everybody is on copium, and your
Yeah, now if
copium
you guys
is
are getting
your
all your
ideology.
opinions from Mike and Kaysen, though, that's fine.
Oh, totally. Of course. Present company discluded, of course. Excluded.
Actually, that's something
We're dope. I don't know.
that is something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Actually, I've been becoming more and more uncomfortable with doing the show. Period.
Yeah.
Because the longer I live, the more my baseline assumptions like dissolve.
But that's not
And-
good because you got to have
and
convictions to act.
The more I realize I don't have any idea what I am talking about at all.
Hey, no, that's Dunning-Kruger, right? There's the scale, and that actually, contrary to what it may seem like or feel like, that means you're actually progressing. Given
hope
that
so.
you have less confidence, and that's the Dunning-Kruger scale, right? It's like right when you first learn about it, you think you're an expert, and then the more you learn, the lower that goes until you realize that you realize what you don't know.
Yeah. What are you gonna say, Max?
Just to that point, Mike, if it makes you feel any better, I'm the same way. But, just remember, I suppose, what the Oracle of Delphi said about the wisest man in Greece. It was Socrates, and he was the wisest man because he realized he didn't know anything.
Yes, he was the only one willing to admit it, I think, was it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just, I think especially, I mean, this is more or less like maybe since we started doing this podcast, it's been ramping up this feeling. But in particular, the last, I would say, month has just been like, dude, I've been doing all this research on certain things that I won't get into because it would take 5 more hours to even explain that. But where it's just like, I cannot find the answer to this. I for the life of me, the harder I try to understand this, the less I do, and it's infuriating.
But the more I find out, the less that I know.
Yeah.
That's Billy Joel.
And so how can I get in front of a microphone on a platform that thousands of people watch and try to tell them anything when I literally know I don't know what I'm talking about?
Funny? You know what's funny? Okay, let me help you out a little bit there. The people like you are who should have the microphone and be speaking, because the people out there who are acting so sure about themselves and so positive, and that of course breeds a large following, and people will, yay, this is my guy and he knows what's up, right? They're the ones that I think should have less of a microphone. They're very sure of themselves. They answer everything with confidence, but if you pried deep enough, you would find out that they don't really know exactly what's going on either.
No.
And it would be much better to have the microphone in the hands of people who are less certain, I think.
Yeah. The only problem is it leads to a lot of inaction. Which is,
good point.
Then
So
nothing
pick one.
happens.
Pick something. Put your feet
there
somewhere.
is no
Find
right
some solid
answer.
ground.
That's what's so frustrating is like there's just no right answer anywhere. It's so hard. It's so hard. But that's not really what I wanted to linger on necessarily, as much as I think that what I'm getting from the fact that all of these extremely extreme, radical, not viable philosophies when you think about them at all in the game are essentially illustrating that point.
Right.
While most real life philosophies, definitely not all, but while most of them are at least a little more nuanced than this, in like the scale of things, you still have to look past a lot of problems with them.
Yes.
To become and make assumptions and really strengthen those as a foundation that might not be as solid as you want to think they are, in order to, again, the main purpose of which is to give your life some meaning and purpose.
Sure.
To explain why you're going through the hard things you go through and all the conflict and terrible stuff that happens. Of course, there's two sides of that coin. I'm not saying it's all that. I'm saying that is the part you focus on the most because that's the unpleasant part.
Yeah.
And then you go, why did that happen to me? Oh, this helps me feel like there's a reason.
Right. What like Nietzsche said, he who has a why can bear any what or how. However it goes. Yeah. So, but at the same time, if you don't have any why or reason, everything becomes very cumbersome.
I know.
Okay, we don't need to push that too far. Here's a thought that I've had for a while. I actually brought this up in Max, the discussion we had. The definition of God as essentially the cause for which the effect is the known universe. That's just that doesn't tell you anything about God. It's just a scientific way of explaining what something that something has to exist, and so there is something like that, and then I'll call it God. Okay, definition. Okay, great. I just proved God. Wonderful. That isn't super helpful. But faith is less about does God exist? Because you can reasonably posit that there is something like a God or a cause for the universe to begin with. Faith comes in.
You guys talked about that a lot last week.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah.
Where faith comes in is the assumption that God is good. That's no evidence. Zero, well, maybe not zero, but not a ton of evidence, little evidence that God is good. But what happens if you just roll with that assumption, right? As opposed to the opposite one, that God is evil, or maybe that God is neutral, or whatever, the things that are happening here. If it's neutral or if it's evil, that presents you with some very difficult circumstances and things that can easily be taken advantage of.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just enter life with the assumption that life is worth living and that God is good and that things are going to work out and that there's a bright future ahead, there's no evidence for these things.
No.
But if you make that assumption, you will find that it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, but you will find that things are better and that things do work out and that you will start to see the goodness of the universe if you start with that assumption, right?
Yeah. I must have been a 5-hour conversation with my mom on Sunday about this very thing.
Oh, really?
Right. So
that's interesting.
She was explaining some of the things that she believes and why, and very thoroughly thought through.
Yeah.
Very, very thoroughly thought through. I mean, I'm not talking about my mother in the sense of the average person I was just talking about earlier who just, here's an answer.
Yeah.
I accept that. That'll give me some purpose in my life. She's thought through this. And we were even, in my attempt to sort of, I don't want to say debate. It wasn't a debate. It was a discussion. It was a dialogue.
Counterpoint. Yeah.
I was bringing up the, conspiracy theories and how convincing they can be.
Sure.
Because it kind of relies on the layman who's listening to it not understanding whatever field that is being talked about nearly as well as the person positing the conspiracy.
Yeah.
Who has done a lot more research, understands it way better than I do. And so there's a little bit of the, what is the fallacy? Appeal to authority going on with that, right?
Sure, yeah.
Where you assume, well, they must know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm going to believe them. However, a lot of times these things get turned on their head by a single assumption.
Yeah.
A single assumption that serves as the foundation of the argument, which, if that is true, it very reasonably leads to all of these conclusions.
Right.
But often
they're
that
based on an assumption. Yeah.
is not correct.
Yeah.
And so all that work from a very intelligent human being
right.
who can recognize all the patterns and put them all together in this package that is extremely convincing is faulty on the most important part, which is the baseline assumption, the foundation of the argument.
Yeah.
And then another, what's the word I'm looking for? Expert from the field walks in and says, no, actually, it's this. And the whole thing just turns on its head and completely changes the entire context.
I've seen that happen many times. Yeah.
I mean, I can't even count how many times I've seen that. And where I believe, this is legit. This seems like totally reasonable. I'm on board with this. This makes a lot of sense. And then the whole thing, I mean, just like a foundation of glass, just like completely shatters with this very, very simple piece of context, right? So I was kind of talking about this with her, and she was saying a similar thing to what you're saying. It's like, well, you have to choose some assumption. with
Right.
which you
All
assume is
foundations-
true.
I think all foundations are assumptions. I think they have to be assumptions.
Yeah.
Even math and science. That's what Gödel and Heisenberg and all that.
This foundation, Mike, she says to me, that you're looking for a foundation to build upon of which is not an assumption, it is actually legitimate truth. That doesn't exist in life. So which one are you going to choose to believe? Or are you just going to allow that entire thing to dissolve and have nothing to stand on, nothing to believe in, and nothing with which to guide your actions? So I've been thinking about that a lot, and I don't know.
5 hours wasn't enough. Should have been 6.
I don't know.
It was in the sixth hour, and you missed it.
There is such a, and this is not to say that, again, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm telling you that I'm being completely forthright on this.
Yeah.
I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Very good.
There are many areas which I argue with people online, and you might even be thinking of recent examples, viewer, where I was arguing from some baseline assumption, and so I'm being hypocritical. Yes, I'm admitting that.
Right.
However,
but you have to. We all are based on assumptions.
in so doing, in that experience of the arguments of which I'm talking about, I stepped back from that and started trying to process the counterpoints, and it started dissolving my foundations, and it was like a chain reaction of all foundations.
Oh, geez.
But there's a real hesitancy, a real like resistance in me to stand on something I know is an assumption rather than believing the assumption is true. I think like most people do. It's a very difficult position to be in.
Even science is based on assumptions.
I know.
And even math. Like
100%.
And
100%.
Gödel and Heisenberg and they
100%.
showed this without question. It is based on assumptions.
That's what I'm saying is it literally doesn't exist. There is no truth foundation that is certifiably not an assumption that in existence at all. It's not there. No matter.
And that's a weird place to be.
Yeah.
You're telling me.
Anyway, this is a way off course.
Because you're not supposed to know that it's an assumption. It's like you're seeing the source code. You've seen the Matrix now. You're looking at the zeros and ones, and you're like, it's just zeros and ones.
It's just fetching zeros and ones, people. This world is not real. Yeah.
See what this game can do to you guys?
I know.
Oh my gosh.
It's crazy. Anything you want to add to that, Max? We've been talking for a while.
No, I think that at the core of that, the fact that human beings being imperfect entities are unable to stand upon a firm truth, it actually translates well into the discussion that I think we're about to have about the States faction and the merits and deficits of that. But I mean, I could just save that until we dive into it.
Yeah, I think before we move up to the Clerks Ward, I do at least want to talk about the Doom Guard a little bit because you brought that up, Max.
Sure.
While they serve entropy, they're all united on that front. Yeah. They don't agree on how.
Well, you can't.
Yeah.
The whole point of chaos is that if they all agreed, they'd be an orderly uniform, they'd follow laws and they all agree. That can't happen within this type of a system.
Yeah, so some of them, I think Coax Metal would be part of this group. They are accelerationists.
Yes, yeah.
Right, they think it's important to help entropy go faster. It's not going fast enough.
Right.
That order is getting in the way of entropy doing its thing.
And entropy is quite natural.
Yes.
And interesting, yeah.
So then you have the other part, which is de-accelerationists. They think, no, we got to slow it down.
Yeah.
It's going too fast. But yes, entropy is eventually what we want.
But just not now.
Just not yet.
Seems pretty reasonable.
Right. And then there's the other faction, which is, no, it's operating as it should. It's just let it be what it is. We don't need to do anything.
More or less middle, and that's more or less accurate in terms of, like, it's going to happen.
Well, what's your baseline assumption to make that conclusion?
My baseline assumption is the Big Bang, which people,
which is a baseline assumption.
It is a baseline assumption.
Anyway, Doomsguard also...
This is a good one because this feeds into a little bit of the immortality stuff too. But He says, when a thing seals itself against its own destruction, it merely dies a different death.
I loved that line.
Yeah, it's a great line because it's almost like there's two different ways to die. There is, you can explode or dissolve, or you can be scattered outward, or you can become solidified. You can freeze, right? You can be solidified, you're not moving, and you're dead that way. But either way, you're dead. And this harkens back to something that I don't know who, this is probably actually, if I think about it, this is more... why in the world did I just forget his name? Okay, Max, help me out. Who was like one of the early Greek philosophers? Heraclitus. Okay.
Yes.
This is it's similar to like what Heraclitus would say about flow and things changing between states, and that's what makes a thing what it is, right? But it's constantly moving. If it stops moving, it's dead. If it so the idea here, Rumi, the Muslim philosopher, he said something along the lines of like a butterfly's wing has no use being in the up position or the down position, but in the movement in between the two. And a hand has no use being closed or open, but in the ability to go from closed to open. Right. I would argue the same thing about your mind, right? You've got your mind needs to be open, but I actually, and this is my whole life, I have spent basically learning this because the idea is the open mind is such a virtue. But the only purpose of an open mind is so that it can close on something that's like real or solid or something
as
meaningful.
Alan Watts would say, closed implies open. It's degrees of the same thing.
There you go. That's right. So, but the brain needs to go through times of opening and closing, right?
Yeah.
Of this is how we see things too. You're seeing everything, and then you focus on one thing, and then you see everything again, and you focus down on one thing. And the idea is that if you're just doing one of those two things, you've lost it, right? You're done,
right?
And your hand is dead if it just stays like this forever. Like if it doesn't move, it's dead. But if it explodes, it's obviously dead. So anyways, it's so funny because he says, okay, if you just become too orderly and rigid, then you die a different death. And he's right about that.
Right.
But then he's using that to then justify the explosion of everything or the dissolution of everything, which is what the philosophers would say is that no, it's a state, just like with the yin and yang, where you walk the middle path or the straight and narrow. It's you don't go too far right or too far left. You try to balance that right down the middle, and that is the place of most meaning.
I know I'm on a bit of an Alan Watts kick today, but
he's great.
It's because there's a specific quote in that I was going to bring up for a thing later, and in researching that, I watched a bunch of other things. But
he's wonderful.
He also talks on entropy itself, and it seems absurd to him that if it banged once, it can't bang again. Right, that it goes along exactly with what you're saying. It's a movement between two states.
Right, sure.
That the two states are not different things.
Yeah,
they are again, as the Kybalion talks about, the same thing, experienced in different degrees, and the degrees move you between one and the other. That these things go back and forth.
One of the early ideas about the Big Bang, when this was all getting formulated about 100 years ago, was that maybe the universe explodes. And then the gravity kind of forces it to slow down and then come back in and then explode again. And it's just this constantly. Now that recent, like 50 years discoveries have shown that that's probably not the case. It's likely the universe is accelerating, not slowing down.
Matter.
Yeah. Dark matter. And
dark
then,
energy.
Yeah. So that's like, but who knows? Like they'll find out new science in 12 years that just change everything. So it doesn't actually matter.
A lot of conversation with that on Sunday as well.
But at the moment, they say
science
that
you believe in 300 years ago is very different.
Well, for instance, like Michio Kaku no longer believes in the Big Bang, and he's a pretty big name.
I remember when I first started like really getting into that. Like, well, I say that with a huge grain of salt. Like, I'm not huge into astrophysics. I am very much like a tacit fan.
A plebe.
I kind of try to be in the most basic level scientifically literate on the topic. But he was one I would watch a lot when I first started getting into it. I think he's probably the most popular astrophysicist in the world. But yeah, it's interesting. I know exactly what you mean. He's changed a little bit on that recently.
So it's like, I don't know. Well, we'll see what science says in the future.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I got for that. Oh, by the way, thinking we wouldn't have enough for this episode was hilarious.
It always is. It always is. So that's Quack's Metal. I guess maybe we should talk about the believers of the source real quick. I just want to bring up what they are, because at least for the factions and the philosophies we encounter in the game, I think it's important to discuss them.
Okay.
Like we said, there are quite a few that you don't even encounter that are part of the Planescape setting, but that don't come up in the game. So the believers of the source, known as the Godsmen, believe that each life is a test and that every person has the potential to become God. Their headquarters is the Great Foundry, symbolizing their belief that the multiverse constantly forges and refines all beings. The religion shares many parallels with Hinduism, Buddhism, and certain sects, or I guess all sects of Mormonism. However, the ultimate goal is not nirvana, but apotheosis.
Yes.
So apotheosis is the process of becoming a deity, becoming God, right?
Or a God.
Moksha.
Go ahead. Talk about that, Meg.
I was just going to say, well, like the apotheosis, becoming something like a god, that's moksha in Hinduism. But godsmen, they're basically, if you wanted to really simplify it, it's just mainstream religion, the belief that this life is a test and that you're meant to contend with all the tribulations of life in order to strengthen your soul and have it pay off in some sort of afterlife. Aside from that, maybe I could just mention that when I did a poll of my audience from 1 to 15, of all the 50 factions, I ranked how many people linked with them, and Godsman came in at number 2.
Oh, number 2.
Really?
Yeah, really. Yeah, Doomguard came in at 15 because I suppose that one was the most.
Nobody wants to serve entropy, you're saying?
Right. Yeah, and number 1, in case anybody is curious, was the Bleak Cabal because, I talk about Nietzsche a lot, so go figure.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, I was hoping you'd bring that up. Maybe we can go into that a little bit more, because I remember watching your video where you talked about that poll. And I think I even saw the one that gave some of the results. But which was the faction? If I'm remembering correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, did you end up like revealing the faction that you most aligned with, or was it that your audience guessed you were most aligned with? Am I remembering that?
No, I told people, and it's Sensates. Sensates forever, baby.
I think the Sensates would probably be what most people would. Was that number 1 on your poll?
No, it wasn't. It was like mid. Wasn't. Yeah, it was like in the middle.
It was number 10.
Number 10. Holy cow.
That's really surprising.
Yeah.
So what was number 1?
Literally, it's what the Sensates are is what I and you guys basically do.
Right.
Just discover everything, right?
Yeah. Or try to, yeah.
Or try to.
So what was number 1 on your poll then? If it wasn't
Cabal.
The what?
The Nietzsche
the Bleak
peoples.
Cabal.
Oh,
Cabal.
Really?
Yeah, like the people that believe that there's no inherent meaning to life, but maybe you can try to make existence a little bit happier through good deeds. And people within the Planescape fandom tend to associate that with Nietzsche's positive existentialism, or quasi, sometimes he could be a little bit of a Nietzsche's not the nicest guy, but at least in that regard, he was affirmative to life itself.
That actually doesn't surprise me the more I think about that, because I think anybody who's on the internet searching for Planescape videos or who is interested in philosophy, I think that type of person would trend that direction more than the average person on Earth would. Right? I think the average person would lean Sensates. If you polled the whole world, they would say Sensates.
You think
but
so?
if you polled philosophers and like,
yeah, they'd say.
I think they would lean that direction. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Was that a subtle dig at me, Mike?
No,
I'm
not
kidding.
at you.
I'm kidding.
Not at you. At the average armchair philosopher.
Yeah.
Like myself.
That's great.
That's really interesting, though. I'm glad you brought that up, because that was something I wanted to ask you at some point during this series.
There is kind of some tension there. They're similar in the top 2 that you talked about, the Cabal and then the Godsman, but they're also kind of like opposites. Right?
Yeah.
At least in terms of, purpose or not, but then they ended up being the top 2. I thought that was fascinating.
That is
really it's interesting. I got so many people in my audience that are very religious people, like a lot of people leaving Christian Bible verses in my comment section, and then people who are not, like people who might identify with the Bleak Cabal will respond to them, but they'll be so nice about it. It's just
that's awesome. You got a good comment section. It sounds like
yeah, totally.
We do too.
Okay, so that's the Godsman. There's a lot of stuff you can do in the Great Foundry. I mean, I ended up joining and staying in that faction, not because that's
you're a
necessarily what I wanted. It was just a convenient to not join the Sensates when I knew I had already been a Sensate before.
You could,
so I could convince whoever he is that's at the front to let me go to the private sensorium by saying I actually was already a member in a previous incarnation. So
Once
it was just a matter of convenience.
Always a Sensate, huh?
Right. It was just really a matter of convenience. I didn't really care what faction I belonged to at the end of the game. I was just trying to explore quests.
Yeah.
But so I ended up staying in that faction through the end of the game after. So I left the Dustmen and went to the Godsmen, then stayed in that. But there's some good quests in there, just not anything in particular that really stood out to me as being something to really dive into. Like to join them, you have to kind of solve this murder mystery. In doing that, there's a couple different ways you can go with that, and you implicate certain characters or not.
Yeah, and then once you figure out what happened, who do you charge, right?
Who do you
because there
choose
are
to,
people who are guilty in different ways. Then there's somebody there who's an anarchist, and do you expose them for what they did? And all
that
stuff?
leads to a whole quest, which leads you to the anarchist faction. I can't remember the name of them right now. Do you remember
the Narkies?
Max? What's the name of that faction?
Oh, the anarchists. It's either pronounced Chaositex or Zousitex.
Is that it? Yeah, something like that. It's with an X.
With an X.
Yeah, that's right.
Exausitex.
Yeah, that was the one quest in the game that I wanted to do but didn't end up doing, just for the sake of maybe that's going to bring something interesting up on the podcast. Okay. So I think what I'll try to do is maybe watch a walkthrough of that online for next week and try to bring their philosophy a little bit into the discussion. But I guess that's something that I missed in particular in this section of the game. So just know that I'm aware that we're missing some of that, and that could probably be some interesting stuff to dive into. So though next week will be very dense, I'll try to work that in next time. Yeah. But
there's also at this, I can't remember if this happens later or not, but at the Foundry, actually, gosh, this might happen later. I think this happens around here. At the Foundry, there's the guy who he lives at the top, and you kind of have to talk to him through the room and then convince him to continue living. I can't remember exactly what happened there though, but that was at the Foundry, wasn't it?
Yes. And I'm just remembering, I have to correct myself before the entire comment section does. It's not the Chaos Men I'm thinking of. It's not the Chaos faction. We already talked about them last time. That's the Howling Wolf people. I'm thinking of the anarchist people, which is the Revolutionary League.
That's it, the Revolutionary League.
The Revolutionary League.
That's somebody just
anarchist. Yeah, we just got that in the Patreon chat here. The anarchist faction, which is the Revolutionary League. Right. That quest is the one I did not do. So there's my correction ahead of time for all of you people who would, I don't know.
They know who they are.
That I got it wrong.
Okay, well, I think we can jump on up.
Yeah, let's move up to the Clerks Ward, which is juicy stuff.
Max?
Oh, no, I was just saying, this is my part of the game, my favorite part of the game.
Well, it's just the brothel. I mean, that's
that's the first place I went.
Of intellectual brothel. Thank you, just in case you don't know yet.
The word slake.
The brothel
such a good word.
Slaking intellectual lust.
Slaking intellectual lust, which for a game that is not very visually compelling was the right choice. It's like, how do we take a text? Oh, let's make it intellectual lust. Oh, perfect. Yeah. And it was the right choice. It was great.
Again, I think I mentioned this in an earlier episode, just an entire concept that I don't know if my brain would have ever even conceived of. Just another example of that in the game, right?
And this was 25 years ago. Yeah. How come nobody's still doing? How come every game doesn't have a brothel of intellectual lust?
Because the game didn't sell enough copies.
Okay, well, that might be one.
So they figured the player base, they don't care about the brothel of slaking intellectual lust.
They might think that. They might incorrectly think that.
They incorrectly think that. So you could spend a long time in here.
Yeah.
And there's probably a lot we could talk about, but I want to pass this. Yeah. I've been talking a lot in this episode, so I want to pass this to Max first and see where you went with this material.
Okay, sure. So the brothel of slaking intellectual lust, it was set up by a being known as a Tanari, who is otherwise known as a succubus, or a former succubus in this case, a succubus named Fall from Grace. And her species originates from the plane of, what's the hell plane? It's the one of
it's not
chaos.
But Tar, it's
one of the
others
bottom ones.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's not the one we go to that Cursed is the gate to, right? It's not that one. It's the other one.
Remember.
It's the Abyss. I think it's the Abyss.
Oh, the Abyss.
Yeah.
So she comes from that part of the Outer Planes, and it's taken her a long time to get from that place to Sigil, but she wanted to go there in order to try and leave her origins behind, because when you're a succubus, you tend to be associated with a lot of terrible people, and her particular species was involved in the blood war against the Betezu of Bator, and the forces of chaos and order in the Hell Planes fighting against each other. She wanted to leave all that behind, and so she went to Sigil in order to try and create the brothel of intellectual slaking lusts, or slaking intellectual lusts, to try and learn as much as she could from as many different people in order to become a more integrated person, and try and overcome the nature that she was born into. And thus, within this brothel, you can encounter a variety of different people, of very, very interesting backgrounds. And by interacting with all of them, you're supposed to get a deeper appreciation of the different ways that human nature can evolve, sometimes good, sometimes bad. And this is all in line with the faction that Fall from Grace is a part of, which, as we've been alluding to this entire time, is the Sensates. And the Sensates, their entire raison d'etre is to try and experience as much of the multiverse and the universe as they can, in order to be able to become a better person. Now, that I do sympathize personally with that, because that's essentially what I try to do with everything that I do in my life and on my YouTube channel.
And it's worked out well for you, right?
Sometimes it can drive me nuts, but I'm better generally for it. But even then, there's a problem. With all the different factions in the game, there are a lot of problems, and the Sensates are no different. I'm humble enough to admit that when it comes to the Sensates, the main problem is that the way they perceive the world around them is through the senses, and the senses of any mortal being in the universe are not perfect. Right. And so when you try to imperfectly perceive the world around you, you're not really going to be able to get all the information that you're supposed to. You're only able to create representation. This sort of goes back to Immanuel Kant's theory of the thing in itself. So you can't perceive the thing in itself. You can only perceive a representation of it. Right. So senses are only going to get you so far. But you can get pretty far if you try hard enough, which is what people like Fall from Grace are trying to do. And she's a very, very interesting character for that. But I could go on, but I think that's enough for now, and I'll throw it over to you guys.
That's great. I was thinking too, when we have that experience that is essentially seeing Dayanara's her what was it? Longing, I think. Longing was the emotion that you were trying to experience here. The experience that we had was so different than what anyone else would have touching that same stone, because we were involved, I guess, in the whole. It's
interesting that literally
memory.
all three of the private sensorium stones give you a different experience with them than any other person could have.
Which questions the Sensate's entire goal, where they're like, hey, I'm going to capture this experience. You've got this thing, and when you touch it, you're going to have the same experience, is the idea. You're going to experience this thing in the best way that it's ever been experienced, and you'll be able to have that, right? And then we go and touch it and have a unique experience that no one will ever have. And that is maybe an issue with the whole philosophy.
That also just seems so intuitive that it seems silly to have assumed it would be any different. Because
but is it a noble cause, even though it's impossible?
Sure, but a person's life experience being different from another's means they're going to react to that exact same stimulus in a totally different way.
Yeah.
They'll interpret it in a totally different way.
Because there's no blank slate going into this. Yeah.
No.
Right.
So it's a futile,
especially if it's your memory.
Cause. Talking about
it was for Dayanara.
Talking about I can't remember when I brought this up last. There was some episode I talked about. I had a mushroom experience, right?
Oh, right.
Where my realization in that experience was, oh, this is crazy. I wish all the people that I know could experience what I'm experiencing
That
right
same
now.
thing,
And then
yeah.
I was like, no, that's impossible.
Yeah.
Literally no one will have the same experience you're having right now. No one will ever understand what you're feeling
But
right now.
that's part of the beauty of
Yeah.
the experience,
True.
is that this isn't just
Yeah.
a one size fits all that anyone can just have, right?
Sure.
It's tailored. It's specifically at your
Which
you
is
know, that part of your life.
Which is so, again, opposite of
Yeah.
what like that experience is,
Yeah.
which is about breaking out of the individual prism and
yeah.
being connected with everything.
Right.
It's about breaking the ego,
Mm-hmm.
yet you can't seem to really escape that. When you
Right.
come back and try to describe it or explain it, you can only interpret that through the prism of the ego.
Yep.
And then therefore it's not the same interpretation.
And the ego is the thimble.
Maybe
and the experience is the ocean.
while the ego is broken, is the same. But when you
well, that's
return
interesting.
to the ego and its only feeble
Yeah.
attempt of even trying to understand that or interpret what that was,
Using words.
ends up becomes totally separate from everybody else's.
Yeah.
So
That's possible. But you would never know. Like,
Yeah.
once again, you can't apply science to this.
no,
Like, or at least, well, you can't approach this without
you can
with
apply
zero
it, but
assumptions.
you're not going to reach a. Yeah, we're getting sidetracked. Let's go back to the freaking brothel here.
Back to the brothel.
So, couple characters. There's a lot of women you can talk to here, and there's a lot of side quests you can
And
do.
there's even a wardrobe you can talk to.
Yeah,
pretty fun.
so I don't know if it's Louis or Louis, the armoire. I like to call him Louis the voyeur.
Yeah. Louis the voyeur. That's
The
French.
voyeur. Obviously, he's just there to watch the girls who come in undress or whatever,
Yep.
and like keep their clothes inside of his, because he turned into like a, what do you call that? A dresser,
A wardrobe, an
wardrobe.
armoire, or an armoire. Maybe.
Armoire, right? It's
That's
in the
French.
name. It's in the name right there. Should have thought of that. Anyway, yeah. So like, but like the Echo quest is really interesting. She can't speak, but she has like vital
Yeah.
information you need.
Yeah, that was good.
And so you have to end up going and collecting like a fiend's tongue and like talking about the grossness of the game, right?
Yeah.
Replace her
It's
tongue
so
with this
gross.
fiend's tongue so that she can talk to you and give you the information. But Kesai Saris is one of the girls here. She's the daughter of Ravel.
Ravel. I almost said Ravenous. Different game.
Different game. Of Ravel.
Yeah.
And so in order to, I guess this is jumping ahead a little bit, but in order to get to Ravel, which is the whole freaking point right now, we need to get there.
Yeah.
Because that's what Lothar reveals, right? Lothar, the guy who collects the skulls, when Mort gets kidnapped and taken by the were-rats down to him, he reveals to you this night hag, Ravel Puzzlewell, was the one who gave you your immortality.
Right.
So now our goal is to find this character.
So that she can take it away.
But she has been mazed by the Lady of Pain.
Right.
And in order to get into her maze, you got to have exactly the right key.
Which
and
is, I
find the
think,
portal.
technically like a part of her DNA.
Yes.
It's got to be part of her.
He says
body.
it's not him who says it. It's, I think, another character in the private sensorium. I think his name's Quell, who tells you need a piece of Ravel.
Yeah.
And that ends up getting interpreted to the DNA, some drops of blood, which you can get from Kesai
Because
in the brothel. So
but
that
she's
ends
not
up
forthcoming about this.
No, she doesn't want to admit that
Yeah.
her mother is Ravel Puzzlewell.
Right.
Ravel is a very hated character in this particular place in Sigil. She tried to destroy it, essentially. Coax Metal mentions...
Oh, I don't remember that.
I guess it depends on when you speak with him. Have you already gone to Lothar or not?
I just don't remember, yeah.
But Coax Metal will bring up that he admires Ravel, that her skills lie in unmaking and in hastening entropy.
Very nice.
And so he likes what she did.
The
But
acceleration.
Other than Quack's Metal and I guess maybe other Doomsguard members, people of Sigil do not like Ravel.
Right.
So she's not forthcoming about
Well, and she kills people.
Yeah.
If you ever run across her, you're gonna die.
Yes. So anyway, that's the destination we're going to. That's kind of the end of where Anas is getting to. Is finally finding out who Kesai is. Mm-hmm. Hey, can you give me some peace or some drops of blood on a handkerchief so I can go find your mom? And she agrees to do it. But there's like a bunch of quests within this brothel of slaking.
You've got to get the key to someone's heart.
Yes.
And that turns out that this person's like an android. And literally, it's a literal key. Like, tick, tick.
Yeah. You know, he wants to hurt. Oh, there's the other person. Okay, I get two of these mixed up. One character, I think the name is, I think I have it here. Hold on, let me pull it up. I think it starts with D. Delora. She is heartbroken, and her former lover literally has the key, as in the keys of this world, to her heart, and wants you to get it back.
Yeah,
because she can't get over him without the key to her heart.
That's right. Yeah.
But in order for him to give the key to you, he wants to forget.
Oh yes, I remember this.
So you have to. There's all these quests that are very cool and interesting.
Very cool. Most of the quests here originate in the brothel, and then they have you going around.
Yes, that's kind of like the starting point, and then you go out from there.
Yeah,
and then come back. So you're kind of constantly going between there and the Civic Fest Hall, the Sensoriums, and then kind of coming back.
Yeah.
And solving problems for these people. But anyway, Falls from Grace, another interesting example of doing the opposite of the expectation or the trope. As we'll learn next week, with angels in this world, they tend to be the deceitful ones. And you have a literal devil, succubus here, who is the most chaste and virtuous character probably in the game. So another great example of that flipping of tropes going on, which is very cool.
Yeah.
But then who was the other? There was the one, I don't know if it's Juliet, the one who's like in the shadow, like
mute. Yeah. Oh yes. Yeah. The one in the shadow where you can't see her.
You can't see her. I think she has, isn't it the ability? It's the classic freaking monster that turns you to stone when she looks at you.
Oh, the Medusa. Yeah.
Yeah, like a Medusa
or Gorgon
of power, right? So you can't look at her directly.
Right.
A lot of cool stuff going on here.
Well, what was well, I have an idea. I am going to talk about what my favorite experience of this whole thing was. But Max, do you have a specific note from this place that you want to bring up?
Let me see. I suppose the one that was the most in your face entertaining was probably just meeting up with Kamaski Addertongue, or however the hell you pronounce her name. Yeah, and how her whole purpose is to be a practitioner of abuse, and essentially just going to talk to her is like going to your own roast. But and she's like literally just dressing you down, thinking of all the worst possible things that she could observe about you. But if you can do the same thing back to her, she'll be like, I respect you.
Right, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I found that to be that she's like the last one that you talk to, aside from I think maybe Eve's the Tail Chaser, who's also like an interesting character where her entire existence is just trying to collect other people's stories without creating her own.
Yes. Yeah. I like that one a lot.
It reminds me of that Monty Python skit.
You got
we're on the same wavelength.
Yes. I'd like to pay for an argument, please.
But the first place he goes to in the skit, it's the wrong room.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, I was just here for an argument. Oh, this is abuse.
This is abuse. Next door. Okay.
Next door over. And you go, I'd like to have an argument. No, you don't.
No, you don't.
Yes, I do. No, you don't.
You just contradicted me. That's not an argument.
That's just a contradiction.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Classic, man. Oh, Monty Python.
Probably the best comedy show of all time.
Yeah.
We will eventually do, I think, a breakdown of, if it's not the show, like the movie.
Holy Grail.
Holy Grail.
Oh, that'd be so much fun.
Anyway,
mine is the storyteller. And she was so fun because there's like so many stories. You can just sit down and listen.
Oh, God.
And you can almost like pretend to listen, or you can like really listen to all of them. And I loved it. It was so much fun. But there was one particular story that really stood out to me, and it was the 3 wishes one. Right. So
that was
basically
great.
It's a person.
That one's brutal.
Yeah, I know. It's so brutal. It's so brutal. The person just woke up just woke up out of nowhere and is speaking with somebody, and you've got 3 wishes. Okay, great, awesome. Oh, but you've already used 2 of them. Oh, really? Oh, what did I use the first one on? Oh, you used the first one. Well, the second one was to wipe your memory. Oh, well, I wipe my memory. Why would I ever do that? Well, what did I wish for that would wipe my memory? Are you sure you want to know? Well, yeah, of course I want to know. You know, it's like the sensei thing. You know, it's like, I have to know everything. I've got to do it. Why would I not know? Why would I not experience this? And then whatever the answer, I actually can't remember the specific answer, but his third wish was to have his memory erased again.
Well,
or no, that was his third wish.
Right.
So then he couldn't have his memory erased.
The first wish was I want to know who I am.
Yes, who am I?
Second wish was I want to forget who I am.
And then the third wish was
I want to know who I am.
And
but
then
now
no more wishes.
Now you don't get to erase that again.
It was wonderful.
And
it was
if I'm
beautiful.
not mistaken, I believe this is an actual experience of the Nameless One.
Oh, this was the Nameless One.
Like from one of his past incarnations.
Oh, dang.
Am I remembering that correctly, Max?
I don't think
Some
that
of
was
these
made
are.
explicit, but I mean, it would fit.
It would fit, yeah.
I don't know why I am assuming that was
Yeah.
a
I know
story
why.
based on an actual
because it's a
experience he had.
microcosm. It actually aligns up with the whole point of the movie. We're just going through or the whole game. We're going through this whole story, trying to figure out who we are, and we encounter this story that's almost a riddle.
Yeah.
That's like, you can't handle the truth, right?
Yeah.
I want to know the truth. You can't handle the truth. Well, I'll decide that once I hear it. But once you hear it, if you can't handle it, it's too late.
Right.
And the whole point is that we're trying to find out who we are, but there are some situations in which you would be better off not knowing. And so it just fits perfectly in with just the story of the game.
Yeah. I'm sure I'll get corrected on this, and if so, we'll bring that up next time. But I thought I had remembered, maybe it's not in.
Had a similar impression.
What did he say? I had an impression that the Three Wishes story was from the Nameless One too. Okay, so I guess we'll find out.
It is his wish.
We'll get
it may be a future one
by the experts.
Perfect.
But yeah, it's a great story though. It's a really, really effective little I don't know what you call it, parable that is just, I mean, unbelievably profound.
Yeah, isn't it so interesting though that it's sort of in keeping with Cress Avalon's style, with writing so much stuff, that he took that particular story about the Three Wishes and put it in 7 or 8 stories. After, like, he will tell you 7 or 8 stories, and then they'll put that in there. Just hit this little hidden gem. But yeah, it's sort of characteristic of this entire game.
Yeah, it stands out so well.
You have to dig deep.
Yeah.
In almost everywhere.
It's true.
I mean, I'm sure there's like so many things, even as much as we tried to be thorough.
Gosh, that we missed.
That we probably missed or didn't encounter, which is kind of why from the beginning I've been inviting people to share, different things that they did, different choices they made and whatnot. So if you've had experiences we haven't brought up that you think are worth, discussing, please leave them in the comments. But I was going to bring up that Juliet was the character that stood out to me.
Yeah, her story's hilarious.
Not necessarily the most, but a lot in this brothel slaking intellectual lust, because she has this great relationship with her fiance.
Yeah.
It's too
no
good.
problems.
It's too good, and there's not enough conflict. There's not enough drama.
There are people like this.
It's too boring.
Often, this is almost like a human condition, right?
I would argue that.
Yeah.
I would argue that it's not just some people; it's all people.
It's all people.
When you really get down to it,
there's different thresholds, maybe, but everybody wants something to be going on, even if it causes problems.
This is a part of our ongoing discussion on eternal life and everything.
Yes.
That my whole point, which I think it's confused sometimes, is not that eternal life in and of itself is a bad thing. It's that eternal life without
something to
novel conflicts would be horrible. Because without conflict, without something that you don't know, oh shoot, there's a problem I got to solve, life is very boring. And I think a great way to illustrate this is if you've ever read a book or experiencing a story where there's very little conflict.
Yeah,
the story is boring. There's nothing happening. That's what people mean when they say nothing is happening in the story.
Because there's plenty happening.
They mean there's no conflict.
Yeah,
there's nothing driving anything forward. These characters have nothing to do because there's nothing facing them. That's the whole point of a story, is to give the characters a conflict that they have to overcome and grow in the process of, right? And this is the same in life. You are defined by the conflicts you overcome in your life, because that's how you learn. That's how you grow. That's where progression happens in a person. So she's struggling with this relationship. The relationship is boring because there's not enough conflict in it.
Yep.
And so you have to, well, you don't have to, you can choose to go into this conspiracy with her to convince her fiance of an affair that hasn't actually happened, just to spice it up a little bit, just to get him to show a little more interest. Or not, or where is this going to lead? That's the whole point. I don't know if my relationship can be salvaged.
Yes, which is exciting.
I feel so bad for this guy. It's like, I call you 10 times a day. I watch Sex in the City with you every single night. What more do you want from me? This is what you do to me. Can't you find your conflict out instead of not just having to mess with me?
Well, I mean,
Louise.
I think it also plays into, I think, what maybe many people have experienced in life too is this whole concept, which on the surface, I think a lot of people might reject, but that the nice guys finish last concept, right? Like if you're too
nice guys are
agreeable,
predictable, they're stable,
if you're too easy to get along with, if there's not some element of you that I can't understand or predict, or that might seem a little dangerous.
Okay, I don't know. This just happens, right? But I'm reading Twilight again. Because I'm learning Swedish, and it's a book, and I've read it before, and so I'm reading it again. I've never read it in English, but I've read it in Spanish. Now I'm reading it in Swedish, and my gosh, just the insights into a whole new way of thinking that is basically exactly what we're talking about right here.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just wonderful.
Conflict is essential to having any purpose in life.
Absolutely.
If you don't have conflict, you lose purpose.
No.
So anyway, I just found this interesting because it was more than just this character or this specific story. This is like the most overt example of it. But there were many different things that I was kind of picking up on this with, where it's like people are making their lives more complicated than they need to be. They are flirting with danger. They are, but it's all because, like, again, without conflict, and this is how you kind of bring it into your own life, like, whenever you felt bored, when was the last time you can remember feeling bored, and why was that? Like, really think about why was it? What was going on? Why were you feeling that way? Well, I had nothing to do. Right. Okay, well, what does that mean? Having
there's
something to do.
There's always something to do. That's like when people say there's no food to eat in the house, and it's like cans of beans. Like, there's food. Like, what do you mean?
Like, what do you mean there was nothing to do? Why was there nothing to do?
Nothing.
A lot of people are in the middle of doing something when they feel this way.
It's true.
They're watching a show.
There's nothing to watch, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you really mean when you're saying that? What you're saying is there's nothing catching my attention, interesting, in that it's presenting a conflict that I don't really know how to resolve.
Right.
Murder mysteries are great with this.
Yeah,
it's
that's
like,
right.
oh crap, this is something my brain has got to resolve this.
Yes.
This mystery is so profound that I cannot leave until I can put the puzzle piece together that makes that picture make sense.
And then there's a show like Lost that just drags you along for 7 seasons with that. They'll exploit that as long as they can before it's like, okay, you really do have to deliver at some point.
At some point, you got to.
It can't just be all conflict.
A resolution has to happen at some point.
Yes,
and then you look for a new mystery.
And that's the thing, because there's plenty of conflict, but there needs to be conflict with the hidden promise of a resolution behind it. Right. Something worthwhile to be gained that's hiding somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And then,
what did those numbers mean?
Lost. And with the countdown, right? And the guy found purpose and making sure the countdown always went down.
Yeah. I watched the first season and literally knew this is never going to end. I'm done.
It was like episode 1 or 2 of season 2 where I made that same realization. And I was like, oh, this isn't it ever ending.
That's all this is. Yeah. So it can't be conflict that doesn't ever end. That's also horrible. That's a different kind of damnation.
Yeah, that's true. There you go.
That's like the more literal, I guess, biblical definition of damnation is a horrible experience with no end.
Right.
No resolution whatsoever, just needless suffering forever. But a different kind of damnation, the one that I think is more interesting to think about, is the concept of no conflict, of bliss. Right. Pure bliss, the opposite end of that spectrum, where there's nothing challenging you at all. That's equally, I think, as terrible a thing. You've got to have something.
It's like what Rumi said. You need to go back and forth
between the opposites,
the horrible conflict and then the rest,
and the release
afterwards. The release, the resolution. But then it needs to lead to a new conflict. Yeah. Otherwise, it's boring.
The week has to have an end. The weekend needs to come.
Yes,
you need that 2 days or day of rest from your work, or else it's literally just hell.
And then it all has to start again. Otherwise, what's the point?
Otherwise, man. Yeah. I mean, have you ever? This is maybe. I don't even know if I've experienced this. Actually, I was about to say maybe this is a privileged question, and it is. But I'm asking it theoretically, not even necessarily having experienced it myself. Maybe as a kid during summer breaks or something like that. But have you ever been on a vacation where you wanted to go back to work at a certain point? You got tired of the vacation. Like, dude, this is too long. I got to get back to my life. I think most people would probably say no.
The answer is yes after I had kids. well, once the vacation was less about me getting rest and more about me still working really hard to make sure my kids have fun, I welcomed a little bit of work after that.
I don't know how long that would take. I assume it would have to be something like a summer vacation, like when you were a kid. Of course, I never wanted to go back to school, so maybe that wasn't long enough.
School.
But I think my point is that there's probably a spectrum to this too. Some people could go longer without having to work than others.
Yeah.
But I feel like for me, there would come a certain point where it's like, I can't just sit on this beach the rest of my life, dude. I need to get back to work. I need to go do something.
This is every assassin movie ever where it's like, I'm retired. I don't work anymore. Oh, I know you. You're the kind of person who could never not work anymore. You're right. What's the job? I'll do one more. And that's every assassin movie ever.
Right. You can't just disappear into the Alaskan wilderness.
No, Jason Bourne, he went to
Snake.
Thailand or something. Yeah, it's like you can't.
You can't get out of it. You can't. Where was it that Snake goes in the Alaskan wilderness before Metal Gear Solid 1? Max will notice.
Well, I mean, he went into the Alaskan wilderness,
but they don't say.
Wasn't
where,
there like some island or
he had his dogs? Remember,
that's right.
He's stoked.
Anchorage.
I can't remember. It was somewhere.
It would have been
there,
Alaska because he was a busher, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway. Yeah. You can't do that forever. You got to come back for one more mission.
One more job.
This
is the last one though, and even when you say that, I would still do another if it
3
came up
more
again.
games later. But yeah, I think that. Rambling a bit at this point. I think people get the point. You've got to have some conflict in your life. Otherwise, it feels meaningless. It feels like you're not going anywhere. It feels like you're not growing. And consider that next time your wife or girlfriend might be like egging you on in an argument of some kind. Or the vice versa, I guess.
Very nice.
Your husband's being annoying for some reason.
Yeah.
Maybe they just need a little conflict. They're just feeling too bored.
And then give it to them.
And there's probably healthier ways to do it other than picking fights.
Than what I just signified, probably.
I think
conflict, that is.
That's right.
Well, yeah, you can. There are a lot of healthy ways in which you can get to know each other better.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Solve problems together, work on something that will enrich your relationship without having to fake an affair. Right? That's obviously not a healthy way, but that's a desperate way to try to make this stagnant relationship move somewhere.
Right. Oh, and I love how it goes when you find the guy and he's just like
distraught.
He is, but then it's like, I can't remember exactly how it resolves, and I guess there's different ways that you could do
it.
But at least for me, basically, he was saying, "Oh no, tell her that all's forgiven" or something like that. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it was basically another way to just be done with the conflict and not introduce anymore. And at least the way that my playthrough went was something along the lines of, "Hey, don't tell her that."
It made it worse. Yeah,
let's lie. Tell her you're having an affair, and now this whole thing's going to get a lot more interesting, and she's going to love you.
Yeah, right. So I liked that a lot. I think it was a nice little. Again, we use the word microcosm a lot, but of that principle.
It's a good word.
All right, should we move on to the sensoriums here and end on that point? Some great material. So inside of the what do they call it? The place where the sensates are at. What's their place
It's
called?
the Civic Fest
The
Hall.
Civic
Fest
Fest
Hall.
Hall.
That was it.
And you go to the Civic Fest Hall. Oh, there is something I wanted to bring up with this. They have the lecturers, like the lecture rooms.
Yep.
And there's
Yeah.
one character who talks about the Blood War, which is a very important setup that you should keep in mind if this is your first time playing the game. So let me talk a little bit about the Blood War. I think it's Gissus the Crooked is the guy who's talking about it. And he sort of talks about what the Blood War is, but I'm just going to read about what the Blood War actually is. It's a battle for supremacy of law over chaos, and vice versa, that has been raging since time immemorial on the lower planes. So in the chaotic like the evil planes, whether chaotic or orderly, but the evil side of the spectrum. The war is massive and impacts the entire multiverse. Few are those who have not heard of it or experienced its effects. The Blood War is a battle between fiends, the Tanari, which is what falls from grace, her people, right? From the Abyss, representing chaos, and the Batezu from Bator, intent on imposing law in the lower planes. So they're just this endless blood war in the hells of the Planescape universe between the lawful evil and the chaotic evil factions. And they just fight this endless, horrific war that never ends. Just keep that in mind. That's a thing in this world, and it impacts everybody.
Don't be evil.
So you learn about that here. So there's some interesting characters, but I think the most interesting parts are when you get into the sensoriums.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like, again, we've been talking about like what the sensates are all about. Have we actually brought up their philosophy yet? Have we talked about it in detail?
No, just do everything. Max, do you want to outline that for us?
Yeah, no, it's to try and experience everything that you can experience in the multiverse and use it to sort of become a more integrated individual. That's basically it.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
This would be, well, I guess we've already talked about that, but maybe the opposite of what the Doomsguard are about, right?
Oh,
right.
They're having as much experience,
right,
as much of the complex forms from the early birth of the universe, not the entropy at the end of it. So what they have are these sensoriums where you go in and there's like these crystal balls essentially that are captured memories, different that essentially embody different types of sensation or experience. And you can go there almost like a movie theater or something, right? You pay for your admission, you take
that's right, yeah.
and you go in and you live that lived experience of another person that's been captured in this crystal ball. Really cool idea.
Oh, very cool, yeah.
And so in the public sensorium, they're shorter little experiences, but they have the standard sensations: unavoidable pain, tender love, mind-numbing tedium, sheer wonder, consuming impatience, tired surrender, supernatural lust, psychosis, which was just like, oh, dude, you're basically Hellblade, Center
that
Sacrifice.
One was very interesting, yeah.
Festering jealousy, bitter loathing, pure glee, frightened exhilaration, grim determination, and complete bafflement. So captured memories from people experiencing these sensations or these feelings. And I think one of them, it might have been mind-numbing tedium.
That was at the lecture hall where you're just like listening to the most boring lecture.
The most boring thing, and every word, there's like this pause, and you're just sitting like, dude, when is it going to end? So it's that kind of thing, right?
You know, I find it fascinating that people would, but this is true. I think people would. And I think there's something to say about this, at least for our life, our lived experiences. But that people would pay to have a bad experience.
Yes.
People would pay to feel the sensation of pain.
This is the Alan Watts quote I'm going to read in a minute.
Good. But I think people would. I really do.
Yes.
And in some ways we do.
Yeah.
Like you go see a horror film. Like what? You know, how much fun is that?
So...
it is pretty fun, actually.
Well, I'm just going to bring that up right now. So
Go ahead.
It just feeds right into it so perfectly. So Alan Watts has this little thought experiment that he wants people to consider. I love the way he sort of phrases it. He's like, I'm not trying to prove anything to you. I just want you to play with this idea. I'm not trying to like tell you something that's a truth.
That's the way to approach Alan Watts just in general.
Yeah.
I think he's playing with things in his mind, and even he doesn't have a, like you mentioned before, like Dunning-Kruger scale, whatever. He's not like got a full grasp on everything, but he's got some interesting ideas that are very fun to play with.
I love that he refers to himself as a philosophical entertainer.
Yes, he's very specific about that.
Yeah,
and he's a great entertainer.
Not a philosopher.
Yeah,
he's a philosophical entertainer. And for those who don't know,
bring
who
that term back, please.
Yeah, right. For those who don't know who he is, he kind of popularized a lot of Eastern philosophy.
Yeah, back in the 50s,
in
60s.
the West.
Yeah,
during the counterculture hippie movement as it was getting started, he sort of was a figurehead people looked up to in that movement, who brought to a lot of people in the West who were not familiarized with Eastern philosophy a lot of concepts from Buddhism and Hinduism and things like that. Yeah. So he played in that realm and just sort of used those concepts in an entertainment form to get people to think about things, but was like by no means Buddhism. A self-proclaimed philosopher or scientist or somebody. Yeah. He just wanted you to think about it, not to quote him or take it too seriously. He was very big on not taking life too seriously. Yeah. Anyway, this little thought experiment, I'm just going to read it, plays really well into this whole concept of the sensates and the sensorium. Yeah. If you awaken from this illusion and you understand that black implies white, self implies other, life implies death, or shall I say death implies life, you can feel yourself not as a stranger in the world, not as something here on probation, not as something that has arrived here by fluke, but you can begin to understand your own existence as absolutely fundamental.
Very good.
I'm not trying to sell you on this idea in the sense of converting you to it. I want you to play with it. I want you to think of its possibilities. I'm not trying to prove it. I'm just putting it forward as a possibility of life to think about. So then, let's suppose that you were able every night to dream any dream you wanted to dream, and that you could, for example, have the power within one night to dream 75 years of time, or any length of time that you wanted to have. And you would naturally, as you began on this adventure of dreams, you would fulfill all your wishes. You would have every kind of pleasure you could conceive. And after several nights of 75 years of total pleasure, each you would say, well, that was great. But now let's have a surprise. Let's have a dream which isn't under control, where something is going to happen to me that I don't know what it's going to be. And you would dig that and would come out of that and you would say, wow, that was a close shave, wasn't it? Then you would get more and more adventurous and you would make further and further out gambles what you would dream. And finally, you would dream where you are now. You would dream the dream of living the life that you are actually living today.
Right.
That would be within the infinite multiplicity of choices you would have, of playing that you weren't God. Because the whole nature of the Godhead, according to this idea, is to play that he is not. So in this idea then, everybody is fundamentally the ultimate reality, not God in the politically kingly sense, but God in the sense of being the self, the deep down basic whatever there is. And you are all of that, only you are pretending you're not.
Love it. Love it.
So
that's
good.
Really good.
It's so good. And that's essentially the concept you were kind of driving at there.
Yeah.
That you maybe intuitively you come across this part of the game and you go, who would want to experience mind-numbing boredom or
pain? There's that lava one where the guy's hand gets like burned in lava.
Like the experience of burning in lava or whatever. Who would actually pay to go have that experience?
Pay.
And that's kind of the point we've been sort of driving at for a long time, but in a lot of this episode.
Humans would.
You would, after enough bliss, become so bored with it that you would want some real conflict. Because you can't grow without it.
There's that science experiment you talked about a while ago where the researchers didn't tell the people what they were experimenting, right? But they brought people into a room and said, hey, if you push this button, it'll give you a shock. And then they just left. And they just waited to see how long it would take for people to push the button and then see whether or not they would ever actually push the second button.
It was so interesting because...
And everyone did it.
Yes.
After like 20 minutes was tops, I think.
Right.
And everyone was like, ooh. And then sometimes we did it again.
So
and
there's,
again.
There's like 2 phases to the experiment.
Yeah.
So they bring them all in together. So all the participants are there.
Yeah,
and they sort of introduce the button with the shock.
Right.
Like, push that. And it's like, oh, gosh, that was horrible. They're like, oh, yeah, guys, don't touch that. It'll freaking shock you.
Well,
pretending it was just a part of the
right?
room, right? And people just kind of discovered it, right? And they're like, yeah, it gives you a shock. That's part of a different thing or whatever.
Yeah, it's totally unrelated.
So we're going to bring you in first, someone who's not a real participant. They're just somebody there
an actor.
planted. We're going to bring you in first. You come into this waiting room, and we'll bring you in when this one is done. The waiting room has nothing in it.
Right.
There's no clocks. There's no television. There's no radio or sound. They've taken their cell phones from them as part of the experiment. There is nothing to do. There's no books. There's no posters. It is a blank room with nothing to do except the freaking shock button.
Yeah, right there.
And after enough time, universally, boredom was worse than the shock.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, again, the point. Like you have to have some conflict in your life in order for it to feel like you're moving anywhere, you're progressing, you're learning, you're accomplishing, you're doing anything that you have any purpose. Yeah. And so they incorporate that really well into these sensoriums, where there's some very, very horrible, negative,
like the
bad
worst
experiences.
things to do. Yeah, the worst things that can happen.
Yeah.
You know what? The one thing that would be better than going for the shock, though, is just to wait there for as long as you can, just to annoy the people behind the scenes.
If
like, God, I want to go home. I want to go have dinner with my wife. Why is this guy just sitting there?
Start banging on the two-sided mirror or the one-way mirror.
You start the if you're in on it, right? So
if you know,
right.
you're Uno reverse carding the people running the experiment.
Because they're just watching
and
you.
making them watch you until they get so bored that they have to like do something else. That's a great point.
It's like the experimenter has become the experimenter.
We're being hunted.
Yeah. So anyway, the sensations in the private sensorium or the public sensorium or all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you eventually, through many quests and different ways you can come across it, whether you join the sensates like you did, or whether you convince them, I am already a sensate in a previous incarnation, let me in. You come into the private sensorium where there are 3 very special crystal balls, orbs, sensory stones, I think is what they're technically called. So the first one I did was the one where you go, and it's supposed to be some kind of like journey through a forest, but it's like triggered to when specifically the nameless one touches it. It was a trap set by his previous incarnation, who was very paranoid that he was the real incarnation and people are trying to steal his body and they're body thieves, right? Aha! You who have my DNA, my body.
Yeah, I've got you now.
Came here and touched the thing, and now I've trapped you. There is no escape from this sensory stone. You can never leave, and you'll never be able to steal my body again, and the cycle will end.
Yep.
And if you have enough intelligence, at least it's the way I played it, because I played it with high intelligence and wisdom. Maybe there's another way to trick him into letting you go.
Yeah, I'd be interested in
But my resolution to this was, wait a second, you said that, in fact, I wrote it down. Let me just read it, because it's really good.
That was great.
Let's see, pull it up here. Standing circle. Greetings. Okay. I liked the way he gets pissed at you for saying greetings, because he says greetings literally to everyone in the game.
Yeah.
The nameless one's always like, greetings, 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 right? So you say greetings to him, and he's like, oh, greetings, greetings. So good to see you. I bid you murderous tongue be silent, right? That's right, murderous. You pretend innocence is your pretend innocence is laughable. Who are you? Oh, you don't know? Didn't all those lying, filthy, thrice be damned journals tell you who I am? You know, so he goes on and on. He's losing it, right? But he says, I've set up a trap. and to ensnare you for eternity. You may have realized by now that there is no way out of this sensory stone. Your mind is locked here. You'll note the rather sparse surroundings I have for you. It's similar to the experiment we just talked about.
Right.
All to help the madness set in quick while your flesh rots away. And you ask, how did you make this trap? Can't tell you that. It'll never be replicated. The magics used in this creation were lost even to me. Clever it is, though, once experienced, hidden beneath the other, so that no flesh but my own would set it off. So you're starting to see the paradox here. Yeah. You're all body thieves. I'm the real one, but only my flesh can instigate or start this trap.
Right.
So you can say, well, you just said your flesh is the only thing that can open it. I opened it, so I am you. Don't you see that? Yeah. He's like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, no.
That means I trapped myself.
Wait, no, how can I be so stupid? Right.
Yeah.
He fooled himself. So eventually he lets you go because you basically prove the point that he's trying so desperately to avoid. Or he does not, he's gone mad from this entire concept that there are different incarnations, that he is, who is he really? So that's kind of cool. But I think the one you and Max will probably want to talk about, and I'll pass it on for that reason, is the Dayanara sensory stone.
Oh my gosh. So this one was wild.
Yeah.
This was a trip.
Go? Yeah, you go, Kason.
Okay, I'm just going to kind of, read it from this a little bit, but it's fascinating. So he touches the sensory stone, right? And he starts to hear this very familiar sounding conversation, but he's on the other side of it all of a sudden. So the one that this is for is longing. So we're about to experience what ultimate longing feels like, right? And then we end up seeing everything from the perspective of a character named Dayanara, which we had met at the
beginning of the game.
The beginning of the game. She's that little ghost that comes up, and she neither loves nor hates us. Therefore, she neither loves nor hates herself. And that whole situation where she's like really pissed at us, but also she can't let go of us. And so that's partly why her spirit's hanging around.
You get at someone, it sort of implies the more you care and love about them. Right?
It's totally true. So I've got a few lines to write here. So he says, I could not concentrate. My thoughts remained in the present, trapped there by the terrible feeling that writhed in my breast. I closed my eyes, but his words echoed in my mind 1,000 times. Would he ever return? The sound was a whisper, an echo. Only you, only you. Yet I hesitated at the brink of time's door, and he must have thought me afraid to go, but I was not. I was afraid to stay, and the fear, the serpent writhing in my breast, its fangs biting in my heart, filling it to bursting with its poison. Then the tears came running, and then echo the sound, only you, only you. So he's predicting this conversation. He's like, wait a second, I know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so basically what's happening this whole time, only you can help me, Dayanara. But it's wrong for me to ask you for help. Somebody's feigning like, you can only help me. Oh, but I would never ask you. And he's clearly kind of goading a response from Dayanara. And Dayanara's like, oh, I'd love to help you. Please, I'll do anything for you, right? And Nameless One realizes this is him. He remembers this memory. Yeah. And he's like, I'm experiencing this memory from the other side. And as soon as he hears these words, I can't remember what it was. I asked too much of you to accompany Dayanara. I have no right to place you in such danger for my sake. And then Nameless One is saying, it was my words, but they were a surgeon's words, chosen with cold skill, without a trace of emotion. With every word, I felt myself sneering inside, knowing what the stricken girl would see next through her longing-stained eyes. And who was I, that person? That man twisting her with my words, not knowing how powerful they were to her, like bolts from a ballista piercing her breast. Yet she saw only relief at my return. How could she feel and not know that I meant to ... Mm-hmm. I've come to ask for your forgiveness, Dayanara. I shall return to you as soon as I'm able. So we hear this crazy conversation in which she kind of promises to help us out in a particular situation, right? And it leads her, basically it's the reason why her spirit is still trapped, right? And the whole time, it's basically Nameless One is tricking her into doing something for him because she likes him and he's basically like giving her this promise of this future. And all the while he's withholding his word, or he's withholding his true intentions. But Nameless One is listening, and he's reliving this conversation now, feeling her feelings and knowing his intentions. And it produces a crazy mix that nobody else could ever experience if they touched these stones. Every time Nameless One talks, he's thinking the whole time, you liar, you don't mean that. He's feeling the longing because it's what she felt, but he's also trying to fight against the longing because he knows that it's not real, right? And that is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And that's what leads me to believe that each of these sensory stones would give a different experience to each person, because at least in the most extreme case, it absolutely has for him. He's basically, and in fact, the very end of this, what was it? He didn't want to go on anymore, right? I considered leaving the fest hall, but maybe there was a chance that one of the other stones held something of value. So, yeah, it's really crazy. So by the time the experience ends, he's like clawing his face and just like tears streaming down his eyes. And he's just like, I can't handle this. I can't do this anymore. I can't. And it was Fallen from Grace who shows up, and she says, hey, basically like Galadriel style.
Yeah.
Just like, hey, there's nothing you can do about it. What did she say? Let me find it. This is the nature of longing, the desire for that which you cannot change or possess, right? That was unique in his case, but he's now feeling the longing. She was feeling the longing for him and his promise, but he's feeling the longing to go back and change the past, right? Yeah. That's like the deep sense that he's feeling here, but he can't do it. And he's got it in spades, and it's, anyways, it's intense.
Yeah. This is, for me, and it's probably because of surrounding circumstances in my life at this exact moment. Because I read this story when I played the game the first time, and it already was a super profound thing. Then I'm going through and reading it again for preparing for the podcast, and very specific situation and circumstances around my life. Well, two things.
Yeah.
One, the actual personal experiences, which I won't get into. But two, we're talking about Dune at the same time for our Patreon exclusive podcast episodes. And we were talking a lot in that breakdown about manipulation of belief. Being at the core of what that story is really all about.
Yeah.
And showing the consequences of it. Right. And really how horrifying and diabolical it is.
Right.
So we're here having a conversation about that a month ago. And then I go down this terrible rabbit hole of experience in real life of seeing this happen.
Yeah.
And then seeing it happen in all these other people's lives that I know. And it going beyond that, I'm just seeing it everywhere. It's literally been like consuming my life, this whole concept, for like the last 4 weeks.
Yeah.
3.5 weeks or whatever.
But that's based on the assumption that there is no right answer.
Yes.
Right. But that is an assumption, right? Yes. So that, because everyone's built on this glass, and you're seeing shattering glass everywhere. You're just like, that's built on some assumption. But that's based on your assumption that there is no right assumption.
Yeah. Let me clarify.
I don't mean to undercut you. I shouldn't interrupt you.
I want to clarify what I mean, because I'm probably being too vague. I'm trying to be vague to not like air personal laundry out publicly, which is not smart.
Well, it linked up with the conspiracy theory thing you were talking about before.
All of that is tied to it. So you were right to go there.
Okay.
I'm speaking more specifically about the manipulation of people like the Nameless One's former incarnation of people who loved them.
Oh, yeah.
And how horrifically damaging this is. And seeing that like up close and personal, like right in my face, personally affecting me, personally affecting my family members, personally affecting coworkers, personally affecting a lot of people around me.
Gotcha.
And this was right on the back of having just done a huge breakdown analysis of this is what Dune is trying to say. Right. And Frank Herbert was kind of pissed because he felt like people didn't get it enough. Right. They thought it was more just a cool hero's journey story. And it's like, no, dudes, No, it's not. Which is why...
So he wrote 10 other books.
Which is why, and I'll bring this up in our next episode on Dune. In Dune Messiah, it's like literally the first thing he deconstructs is the whole was not a freaking hero in the story.
It's easy. Well, okay. Well,
Yes.
it's easy to make that mistake.
It's easy to do. So anyway, it's just been like a really, really hard month for me. And so there's just such an incredibly brilliant duality to this story, because there's the tragedy of Dayanara, who just loves this man and will do anything for him. And he knows that. And he absolutely abuses it in the most insidious way possible, which is, I have, at least in this current moment of time, I feel is like the most evil thing a person can do. There's probably more evil things, but right now, because of where I'm at in life and how it feels in the current moment, it feels like the most evil thing you can do.
It's a type of betrayal. It's like, you know, what is the lowest ring in Dante's Inferno? It's betrayal.
Yep.
Yeah.
The betrayers, that's Judas.
Exactly right. So it's just like really personally like eating at me reading this again. But then there's the other side of that, which is the only experience that this particular person can have from that stone. Literally no one else could have the same experience, because he knows what that person's going to say, because it's him. Yeah. He's watching himself commit that most horrific evil on someone.
And he can't handle it.
And he's not the same person now as he was then. And this is the most interesting part about it to me. I played it as a neutral, good character.
Okay.
But you could have been playing this as a diabolic, chaotic, evil character.
Does it change anything?
I don't know. That's what I'm most curious about. Does the Nameless One break down crying at the end of this experience
if you're
chaotic evil alignment? I'm so curious about that, because I would assume the average person playing this game is probably going to lean good, or something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
Or at least neutral. Most people don't role play being evil. Now, some people do, because you've role played a lot, and like we say, you're going to dream 1,000 dreams.
Right.
You're going to try a sensation you haven't before. And some people, anyway, my point is, he is watching himself do that, realizing what's about to happen. And he is being betrayed and abused by himself in the same way.
Right.
Which is just a whole nother level to this.
That's wild.
Realizing that you yourself do this to other people.
Right.
Sometimes without even knowing you're doing it.
That's the thing. You may not want to know how often you or me or anyone has done this before.
And that was the crux of my like breaking point of this terrible last month I've had, was just like being so just angry at what these people had done to these other people I cared about, and then having a specific memory of my own where I went, oh crap. Like, oh crap. Like, not maybe to the same, I'm not to the same degree.
Yeah, but
I'm not going to prison for what I did.
But I'm sure everyone's got.
But everyone's got probably a story like that.
Yeah.
Where they used or manipulated someone who trusted them completely.
Right.
And just the guilt, what's the word that they use in this game? It's not guilt, it's regret.
Oh, yeah.
The regret that like surfaced in me was just absolutely all encompassing, resounding, just like impossible to escape. I was just enormously depressed.
Yeah.
And I just had no idea how to resolve any of this that was going on around me. And so that was part of the reason why my mom came and had a 5-hour conversation with me on Sunday, was to like try to help me work through some of this stuff. But it was unbelievable, because I had already read that story before all this happened.
Right.
And it was already super like, ooh, you read that, and it's like a gut punch to read that.
Yeah.
And then I read it again after all this context, and it was just like multiplied it by 1,000,000.
Yeah.
And it's you got to be really careful. I think it's important to check yourself on this thing, on this specific thing. What am I doing? Maybe that I don't even realize, or that I'm not being aware enough about. that is manipulating somebody's trust, manipulating somebody's love of me for my own benefit, to whatever degree that's happening. Again, I'm not even saying that this needs to be prison-worthy
Right,
offense.
the worst thing, yeah.
It could be something that's much, much smaller in scale. But I really do feel in this moment in time that that's the most evil thing you can do. And maybe that's something that those who have children would even further be affected by this little tiny innocent being who trusts you so completely. You know,
the
when you
word
look at it that
regret
way,
comes to mind a lot when I think about the past and how I've raised the kids so far.
Yeah.
I'm doing my best.
If you know, I talked earlier about my discomfort with being in front of a microphone these days and feeling like I don't know what I'm talking about. But that was one thing that I suppose I felt important in relation or in the context of the material we're talking about today, to air that message out. Yeah. Think about that. Think about how you might be doing that to others and try to avoid that as much as you can because, man, it freaking sucks.
That's a great message.
It freaking sucks.
I have one more line I have to read here. This is Nameless One saying to Dayanara, I can't say if we'll succeed, but I'll do my best to protect you, and I will expect nothing less of the same from you. You may be required to make some sacrifices. Mm-hmm. And then the text here, this is Nameless One talking to himself now. At that final, terrible word, I felt myself being torn apart. He meant her harm. He meant me harm, for I was her at this moment. And he meant to hurt her, yet I needed her to be harmed, and I wanted to scream after her, that she was in danger. Run, Dayanara, for his eyes unmake all things. And then this is his former self again. Of course, my love, life is sacrifice. This I've learned. Anyways, it's
friggin' diabolical.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But for him to experience that was something I needed to read too.
Yeah. Max, anything you want to?
Just one thing. It's sort of, it's a part of my constant fascination with the character, the Nameless One. To what extent he feels like he is responsible for this stuff. When he learns about what his past incarnations did, is he experiencing it like a memory? Like, oh, I did that and I feel responsibility for it? Or is it like experiencing it as a past life if, you know, you could experience past lives?
Max,
you know what I'm trying to say?
You freaking read my mind. Yeah. This was literally the question I was going to ask as a precursor to our final episode. To what extent is the Nameless One responsible for the actions of his past incarnations? Anyway, didn't want to interrupt you, but I just wanted to say this is just perfect where you're leaving off as a bridge to our final episode on the game.
Yeah, no, that was pretty much all I was going to say. But yeah, that's going to be a huge point of, I think that's sort of the element that we've been alluding to in the past episodes of like, oh, episode 4 is going to be like this huge, big, awesome discussion.
Yeah.
That's all.
And I think that's literally the sort of center of gravity for everything that's going to come up next time.
Yeah.
And I'll save my metaphors for then. But there's some good thought experiments in relation to that that we can talk about. I'm excited to get into. But that essentially that's what we're leading up to towards the end of the game here. Because the last sensory stone is a message from Ravel that come find me kind of thing. Not really anything we need to dwell on. And the guy next to that stone, who is Quell, tells you need a piece of Ravel to get there. You go back to Kesai, get the blood, and open the portal to Ravel's maze where she's at. And,
Dame Ravelness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so be thinking about that as you go into this last sort of act, the third act of the game, conclusion of the story, and let that sort of guide the way that you're looking at things, because it's a big part of the conclusion is to what degree am I responsible for all of this suffering that was caused by a person that I don't even
maybe me question mark?
I don't even in any way sort of what's the word I'm looking for?
Like identify with.
I don't identify with. I don't reflect this person at all in this life. No. So, to what extent am I guilty of that person's transgressions? Yeah. So, that's it for me. Anything else you guys want to?
I have one small fun thing that we can conclude on if you want.
I like fun things.
Jason, do you have something you wanted to say?
Nope, I do not.
Okay, so it wouldn't be a Max Darrett related project if I can find some way to insert alchemy into this.
Yes.
So, Kason, I think you're going to appreciate this. So, you guys know the dodecahedron that you can find in the Civic Fest Hall?
Yeah, that's a good point. I had it as a note, but I didn't know where to fit it in. It's a cool thing.
Okay. So, I've been doing some research into the classical 4 elements recently. I did a video on my channel where I tried to explain why they show up everywhere, particularly in like RPGs and stuff like that. And I found that in classical Greek thinking, there was, I think it was it Plato? Plato, you know, 5 Platonic solids.
Oh yeah, yep.
Yeah. The 5 Platonic solids are like solid formations where every single side is the exact same shape at the exact same 3-dimensional angle and stuff like that. If you look it up, you'll see what I mean. Yeah. Platonic solids, Plato linked those with the 4 elements plus the 5th element that was introduced by Aristotle, which was aether. So there's earth, wind, fire, and water, and then aether. Yep. Now, aether was linked to the dodecahedron. And this is interesting because the 5th element in alchemy was another name for the philosopher's stone. And aether was linked with the elixir vitae, which was the elixir of eternal life that rested within the philosopher's stone. Now, I'm going to bring this back around to Planescape in just a second, but I got to ask both of you: either of you ever played Devil May Cry, the first one?
Yes, I have played the first one. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. In the first game, you can find an item towards the end of the game called the philosopher's stone. Yep. And it's in the shape of a dodecahedron.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sick.
Yeah. And
nice.
In this game, while you're not finding because you kind of already have eternal life, what you're finding a dodecahedron for in this game is what is, at least at this point, the most prized thing that the Nameless One is looking for, which is information on where Ravel Puzzlewell is. And when you get to Ravel Puzzlewell, she's going to unveil the information about your past that you've been seeking up until this point. Now, did Chris Avallone know about this? Probably not. I think it's just something that's fun to think about, but it's a nice parallel. I just thought that'd be fun.
It's just the collective unconscious in action, dude.
There you go.
I tell you what, in the 90s, there was something.
Yeah,
gosh, the whole decade of the 90s might prove the collective unconscious, just in and of itself, between Japan and Germany and America.
It's the one foundation that the 90s proved is actually solid.
There you go.
The one assumption you can make as
that's right.
Literal truth.
That has physical proof.
The 90s proved that the collective unconscious exists. All right. That's a good note.
Very good, Max. I appreciated that.
Thank you again for joining us, Max, and thank you all for watching. Next week will be our final episode on Planescape Torment, so play to the end of the game. Finish it. We'll be discussing it all. Spoilers will be off the table completely. And if there's anything we need to correct ourselves on, please
submit those as well.
Eagerly write that in the comments for us.
And Mr. Edders, get back to Mike, please.
Yeah, if you want to be on next week, we'd love to have you. So I'll be reaching out. But if you don't see the avenues through which I'm reaching out, know that I'm trying. And maybe we can get you on. All right. See you guys next week. Peace out.